So Joe Medeiros, the
Yes.
missing piece, about the theft of the Mona Lisa exactly 100 years ago this August. How did you get interested in this? I mean, it's such an obscure idea that the Mona Lisa was ever stolen. Most people, when I mention it, they have no idea it happened.
Well, neither did I when I first read about it, and that's why I got interested in it. I was actually 25 years old, which, as you can tell by looking at me, was not last week. It was a long time ago, 1976.
And how old are you now then?
I'm 60.
Okay.
I'm 60, so I've been after this story for 35 years.
But you haven't been actually going out with your camera and interviewing and recording the way we see in the movie.
No. That was around about, a story, because when I was 25, I opened a book that I had about Leonardo da Vinci. And on a page about the Mona Lisa, I read a sentence that said that Vincenzo Peruggia stole the painting and he took it to Italy. And like you just said, I had never, most people have never heard of this little obscure thing. And it's like, well, how is that possible? This is the most famous painting in the world. How could I not know, or how could no one know that it was stolen and actually missing for nearly 2.5 years? So that intrigued me.
The Louvre had the painting, they had it up, and it was a day that the Louvre was closed, which it is still closed on Mondays.
Well, today it's closed on a Tuesday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, back then it was Mondays.
And you note that instead of the usual squadron of police security guards that they had there were only 6 or 12.
Yeah, that's what I found in the documents. Normally there were 166 guards, I believe, which by today's standards is very low. But back then, that's what they did. But on a Monday, there were only 12 in the whole museum, and they were scattered all around.
And Vincenzo Peruggia, an Italian laborer who had been living in France and actually had worked in the Louvre as a glassman. He was installing, I guess some mentally ill people had attacked a couple of the paintings, so they decided they would protect the artwork by putting glass on the great masterworks. And so they had over 1,000 paintings that had to have their frames fitted with glass, and he was one of the, 6?
Yeah, there were the subcontractor, a company named Gobier, which was just down the street from the Louvre. They had been the official glaziers of the Louvre since the 1830s. So they did the windows, they did the skylights, and because this was such a massive job that the 2 Louvre framers at the time, it was more than they could handle. So they brought in the Gobier workers, and Peruggia was one of the 5 men to help cut and clean the glass.
And he decided, after the job was finished, that he would go back in and take the Mona Lisa out. It was painted on wood, not canvas, as you know. And they feel that what he did was he had a white worker's jacket, and he just put it under the jacket and knew a special door that he wanted to try to get out of, and left the frame on a stairwell and walked out with the painting. And they didn't even notice it for 2 days.
Yeah, that's correct. Peruggia knew, because he had worked at the Louvre, he knew the ins and outs of the museum. He knew that he could dress as a workman and just simply walk in. The day we shot in the Louvre on a Tuesday, like I said, when it's closed today, and we had to go through fingerprints and all sorts of ID just to get in the door. But back then, they didn't have that sort of high level of security. So he walked in and basically took the painting off the wall. There were other workmen there, but they were taking other paintings off the wall and taking them to different places for different reasons. And because the painting was gone, everybody assumed that either the photographer had it, or the engraver had it, or somebody who was supposed to have it had it. So they didn't really think anything of it, because the Mona Lisa, being as somewhat famous as she was always being photographed or engraved. So she was always being carted off to the museum photographer's studio, which was right next door.
She's called La Gioconda in Europe?
Yeah, the French call her La Joconde with a J, J-O-C-O-N-D-E, and the Italians La Gioconda.
And so once it was discovered missing, they had an interesting theory about what kind of criminal would do a non-violent act like this. And that led to one of the twists in the case, in the sense that one of the French detectives actually interviewed Peruggia and didn't even take his fingerprints, much less search his little hotel room in Paris. Because why?
Well, he was sort of low on the food chain. I mean, they made a list of everybody who had access to the Louvre the day of the theft. There were 257 names on the list. Even the director of the museum's name was on the list. And they fingerprinted everyone on that list because they had found fingerprints on the glass of the frame.
One that could match.
Right. There were a set of fingerprints, one was clear enough to read. And so the police figured, okay, let's take everybody's fingerprint. That's standard procedure today. You know, when I talk to art crime detectives, they say, you know, the first thing you got to do, it's usually somebody who's familiar with the museum. Now, Perugia, because he worked for a subcontractor, they didn't get to those guys right away. So it wasn't until late October, early November that they finally got around to talking to Perugia and the other men who had worked for the museum. Now, like you said, the detective went to Perugia's room, but they didn't take his fingerprints, they didn't search his room, because ultimately they didn't think somebody of his caliber, because he was an Italian immigrant, barely spoke French.
Lower class.
Lower class. You know, I mentioned in the documentary, and this is some of the research that I found, it was a book written at the time of police techniques. And the police really thought there were two types of criminals: the upper class, who planned their crimes and were non-violent, and the lower class, who used violent methods, they were brutal. And Perugia, you know, had a little bit of a criminal record before. He was kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time and got arrested for certain things. And I think they just felt that he was a lower class criminal, not even worthy of them considering.
He couldn't pull off something like this.
Exactly, he couldn't pull off.
He kept the painting for 2.5 years,
right.
And we understand that he constructed a beautiful handmade wooden box with a false bottom and kept Mona Lisa in there. So the amazing thing was, after 2.5 years outside the Louvre, it was not damaged.
No, and some of the conservators I talked to said that that's probably the best place to keep a painting, because, you know, paintings like the Mona Lisa, which are painted on wood, fluctuate a lot with humidity. You know, too much humidity, too little humidity, you know, the panel expands and contracts, and that's what affects the paint surface of the painting. So by keeping it in, you know, basically a sealed environment for that long, he actually preserved the painting.
How can we be sure that the real Mona Lisa came back, that it wasn't a very well done fake?
Well, there are some people in Italy that told me that the real Mona Lisa is still there, hidden in a room in Italy, and they sent a copy back to the Louvre. But you know, you have the world's leading experts, you know, look at the painting, compare it to the photographs that they had. And you cannot fake, you can fake any painting, but because of the age of the painting, as you know, there's a lot of cracks, the craquelure, I think they call it, on the surface of the painting, and you can't duplicate that. So if you have a photograph of the Mona Lisa taken before the theft, and you compare it with the one that you found in Italy in 1913, and the cracks are the same, and then you look at the back, and the back, it's a piece of wood. The grain is going to look a certain way, there's certain marks on it. You can't fake that. So they're positive that it was the same painting.
But also, didn't you talk to the man who had invented the infrared study?
Yeah, Pascal Cote. He invented a technique to use with the multispectral camera, and I believe it was in 2004. You know, he worked with the Louvre and the scientists at the Louvre to really analyze the Mona Lisa, and they just basically took these wonderful digital images.
So